The new Milford Board of Education special meeting notice, June 21st, 2018 at 7 o'clock. If you would join me in the Pledge of Allegiance and a brief moment of silence.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, at this time, we can entertain public comment. I'd like to remind the speakers that we do have a 3-minute limit, so be cognizant of the time you spend. Do we have anybody signed up?
Take a minute tonight to personally thank you all for your hard work over probably the last half year at least, if not longer. Putting the budget together the first time around was probably a very difficult task, and choosing to eliminate 8 classrooms and things like that you did the first time, and I can't imagine the stress you all have been under over the past month or so trying to figure out this additional cuts. As you know, I'm hoping you all got a copy of my group's comments on things that parents really felt were important, and I'm glad to see some of those items are in here. And I also wanted to thank you very much for taking into consideration ways to increase revenue versus just taking cuts. That's making a huge impact, and I definitely can see that that's lessening the hits to our students and our staff, and I appreciate that. Especially things like pay to play. I know that that's a big contention item, but every parent I've spoken to in town, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2, has been in full support, saying that it's a lot less expensive than it is just to pay for a preschool sports program. So they are in support of it as well, from what I can gather. Obviously there's some hits on here that are going to hurt a little bit. We expected that, but I just in looking at this tonight, I'm very optimistic that our children are not going to notice as much as I thought they would, and I'm very appreciative of all your hard work. So thank you.
Heather, I'll open it up for public comment from anybody else, even if you haven't signed up. Okay, very well then. And discussion and possible action. I need a motion to amend the 2018-19 Board of Education adopted budget from $64,278,670 to $63,010,586 as proposed by the Superintendent of Schools on item 3A, proposed adjustments to the 2018-19 budget dated June 20th, 2018.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. And discussion. Bill and then Wendy. Bill?
Yeah, when I received this last night, I thought Josh did a great job. Like Megan said, I was expecting more impact on programs and stuff, and I think the administrators and yourself working together have minimized the effect on our kids. And I know it's been hard work, and I'm sure all the administrators, Ann and Greg over there too, worked very hard, and I really appreciate the effort to not just slash and burn. So thank you.
Yeah. Wendy?
There is no surprise in what my comments about to be, because it's been that way since I first served in this town almost 15 years ago. Pay to play is just wrong. It is out and out wrong. We are a public school. We encourage through our nutrition programs and exercise programs that students get out there and have a well-being, and part of that is playing sports. And what we're saying to you, if you want to be well, we're going to charge you to be well. When you combine that with the increased parking fee and pay to play, We are trying to balance our budget here on the backs of our children. And I believe that's just wrong that we do that. If you add up, you start to calculate what it would cost the families of students that are going to be seniors next year, where the expenses go through the roof. And if your student pays to play, and we're looking at $125 per season, some students play 3 seasons. That, the parking fee, the other fees as seniors, it would be less expensive to have a much higher tax rate in this town for those of us who have seniors than what you're looking at us to do. And I stole that from Ms. Chastain to some degree. We are looking at incredible fees here for students. Some of these children who are playing sports could be looking at $750 to $1,000 in additional expense to play a sport. If we're going to do that, why do we pick on athletes? Why do we not charge the band, all our after-school clubs, activities, the drama club? If this board wants to put in a fee for every activity outside of a classroom, I might consider it, but we won't, because what we do is somehow select our athletes for some reason. And I just don't know why we single out this group of students who represent our school around the nation. We're the school's colors, we're the school's letters, and we say, you know what? We're going to charge you, and we're going to charge you a fortune to play that sport. And for those kids who are seniors next year, I cannot imagine what the additional expenses are on those parents. To boot, charging this parking fee of $225, it's probably going to reduce the number of students that park at the high school. And I had a thought. Our juniors and seniors are smart people. So what are we going to encourage them to do? Not park at the high school, but in the local neighborhoods, the local parking lots, and carpool. And many of them, given their age, are not allowed to have fellow students in their cars with them. So what we're going to do is encourage people to do wrong behavior. Might they get a parking ticket for parking in neighborhoods and all their businesses in the area, and then carpool together? Because some of these kids, most of us who have children that drive to school, require them, if they want that privilege, to pay it out of their pocket. Some parents can pay for it, but many won't. There are other areas, and I'll allow others to speak on that, where we can make reductions, and it might hurt a little bit, but what we're not doing, what we won't do if we eliminate these two things, is we're not putting this on the backs of students to help us balance this budget. I've always been against that. I've always been against pay to play. You want to encourage students to have active lives, those who can. Don't charge them. Say, you know what, come out, play sports, represent your school, be proud of it. But these costs are outrageous. They're unacceptable, in my opinion, and particularly because we seem to single out athletes, and that is just wrong. If somebody wants to put up a motion on here that we charge every after-school program, you know what? Then maybe I'll step up and I'll do that. But you include everybody. You do not select out these students. Thank you.
Wendy?
I'll let Angie in there because I had specific line item questions, so she wanted to.
So I
Running
just
my list.
would concur with Joe. You know, I've always been supportive of pay to play. I think it's a great deal, you know, having a child that plays sports. $150 is a great deal. However, $150 per sport on top of a 50% increase in parking, plus if they're having to pay take more than one AP, which that's been one of our objectives, is to get students to take AP classes. And then now we're telling them, well, you're going to pay more parking, you're going to pay per sport, and you're going to pay for AP. I mean, just for my family alone is $810 that I'll be paying next year. Thankfully, I can afford to do that. And I'm not here for my student, but I'm here for the students who can't afford $810. And there's a lot of them that can't. I mean, almost 44% of our students are food insecure, but yet we're gonna turn around and tell them, if you wanna participate in sports, if you wanna park at the high school, and if you wanna take an AP class, it's gonna cost you $810. That's ridiculous, in my opinion. So if we wanna back it up and do 150 for pay to play, flat fee across the semester, the year, I will support that. But I will not support 3 seasons, $150 per season, 50% increase in parking, and the other costs we're adding to them. It seems very heavy to the high school. And I agree with Joe, if we're gonna do it, we do it K through 12. We charge everybody that does an activity. It's only fair. The high school students shouldn't have to have the brunt of it. And seriously, I would have been better off with an 8% tax increase than to do this for the high school.
Sure. Okay, so I had a slightly different reaction, Bill, when I saw this. It's a surprise. So I guess I'm just looking for a little bit of line item classification. The reduction of a library clerk, is that a specific building?
So you want me to answer it? I'm fine doing that. So yes, so currently we have an opening at Scotticoke. What we try to do with this list is capitalize on current openings.
Right.
That opening happened earlier in the year, and we didn't fill it in part because we were trying to close this year's budget cap. What we've decided in closing next year's budget cap is we wouldn't replace that. However, we are looking at redistributing some of the other library clerks. Scotticoke's a big building. We have elementary schools that are smaller buildings. Whether or not Scotticoke shares with Northville, or whether or not the 2 elementaries share a library clerk and we place one, but there would be a redistribution of staff.
So it's an open position we're not filling?
That's correct.
I just want to be clear on
That's
that.
correct.
It's not very clear here. Okay, and am I reading the pay to participate correctly? Is it 125 per season, or is it a flat fee?
So we looked at, it's per season, and we looked at what other districts around us are doing and what they're charging.
Okay.
And that is in line. I have that Pomperaug charges $150 per student per season with a $500 or a $600 cap. Newtown charges $150 per student per season with a $450 cap. Massac charges $250 per student with a $1,000 cap. And New Fairfield charges $100 per student with no cap.
Right. If I could, I'll try and be brief, but I'll just have a moment. Again, on pay to participate, I was a little surprised. I had, this has come before operations twice, and I've had a conversation with you right up until about a week ago, and this was not going to make the list. So what happened in the last week that perhaps generated this information, and how did we establish the fee? Because I heard the information about other districts. I agree to some extent. I've gone back and done a history of pay to participate. I've taken all the minutes, read everything I could. It has not been pretty. It's been a very divisive issue. That doesn't mean that we don't look at it, because this type of reduction is going to be difficult for us all to get to. But we had really eliminated pay to participate in the January 2015 budget finally. And now that we see that it's back again, not only is it back, but it's at a substantial increase. So my thought to that is, I voted for pay to participate. I didn't have a problem with it in the way that it came about, because when it was brought to the community in the beginning, it was because parents came to this Board of Education and said, please do not cut a sport. Give us an opportunity, spread it around. And that's how it began. It's not that we went in that direction, the community approached us. And that process has evolved over the last 17 years I've been on the board. And it's difficult. I've supported it, but I'm looking at this saying we're introducing something out of the gate where I do think that we could look at other areas, and it has been a very difficult situation, and I think that the cost is, it was a surprise. So I'm a little concerned there, but I think we should be looking in other areas, and I'll try and get those motions out and see if they pass, and if they don't, they don't. Because I've often said, if you're going to not support a reduction, come up with another one on your own. So I'll be looking to do that. That was a concern there, but I did want to verify the cost because it's a little confusing.
Sure.
And it's quite different than what we've done in the past. It's basically 3 times the dollar amount.
So I can speak a little.
Actually 5.
So a couple of times, board members, public have brought up pay-to-play as an option. A board member at one of the meetings brought up, I believe, taking a look at freshman sports, and maybe eliminating freshman sports. It's not something I'm a huge fan of.
Right.
You know, I was a high school athlete, my boys are high school athletes, you know, I'm not a big fan of the pay-to-play. However, and it's not something we had on the list early on. We took some adjustments. We had hoped to have about $150,000 insurance adjustment. That number was reduced to about $60,000
that.
earlier this week. When that evaporated, pay-to-play became more of a palatable issue. When we looked at eliminating freshman sports, that would save us about $34,000.
Which would have been a huge mistake.
And
So
when
I
you
agree.
do, and when you do the analysis, it really is unfair to students to not be able to play at all. When you talk to parents and you say, would you prefer not to have the opportunity or to fund the opportunity, the parents that I've heard from, the board members that I've spoken to, have preferred a fee and keeping the opportunity available. Sport like baseball, where only 18 or 20 students get to play, if you eliminate freshman baseball, it really does impact the number of students that are going to play in their first 2 years of high school.
I appreciate that. That's something you didn't share with me, so
That's right,
perhaps I
right.
wasn't one of those board members that got contacted with that question, but that's okay. I have one other line item question, if I may. If I could, how did we calculate the fees for parking? Currently, I pulled the revenue from 2013 and tried to pull it through the years to see what we have. And how are we calculating that number, that revenue?
Sure. So when we looked at parking at the high school, it's something we talk about on a regular basis. And parking at the high school right now, I was just pulling up my list here to see.
And if I could, by
Yeah.
asking these questions, all of this is distasteful. It's nothing personal. I'm just asking some questions so I can make my
Absolutely.
decisions.
And please know that
I,
we didn't put any, you know.
I understand.
We're just trying to climb a
Yep.
$1.2 million hill. So currently, parking fees at the high school are $150. Those
Yep.
parking spots sell out in, you know, like concert tickets. And there's a line out the door when we have one open. So there's a little bit of supply and demand in here. We spend $3.5 million on transportation to provide busing through the community. I understand there's a variety of reasons why students choose to drive versus take the bus, but they do have an alternative. And we do have something that's in high demand. And so while I appreciate and understand where Mr. Faya's comments are, and again, we're not looking to go and price gouge students, but we do have parking spaces that high school students really want, and that's something that we think is manageable.
and are the rest of the positions that are mentioned on here, are they positions that are currently open, or are they full reductions?
So all 10 of the positions that are on here are positions where there's either been a retirement or someone has left, and we looked at reallocating that position and eliminating it from, so none of these positions mean, let me rephrase that, almost all of these positions mean, there's one position I'll get to in a second, that they're currently vacant. These are all vacancies. As people retired over the last month and a half, we looked at each of those retirements and said, can we do without? Or can we move things around so that we can
And
do
that's how I
without?
read your memo, that
Yeah.
basically,
Yeah.
we're not, while we're eliminating the position, we're not basically getting rid of the person,
That's
so to
right.
speak,
That's
eliminating the
right.
job. Just wanted
The
that
only
clear.
asterisk to that, so the Hill and Plain position, so we budgeted for 141 kindergartners at Hill and Plain.
Right.
Our current enrollment right now is 101. So that's, in my mind, it's two sections of kindergarten that we could eliminate. Historically, we've gotten a bump in August, so we're going to prepare for that, but we feel that we can absorb one of those positions. We also feel that with other openings in the district, we'll be able to make sure that we're not handing anybody a pink slip.
Thank you.
Okay. Brian, Angie, JT.
Well, I agree with the pay to play also, just only because it's an unequalizer. People who can't, high school sports are very important to many students, keeps many students in school, keeps many students
does.
getting good grades. But at the same time, we have to make hard decisions. And I'm glad that there isn't a lot of cut in academic programs, and I honestly don't support pay to play. I never will, but at the same time, I think it's a hard decision that we have to make, and I hate it, but I understand it, and I appreciate that it's not cutting academic programs, because it's a school. High school sports are incredibly important, but education is, I was a high school athlete. It never got me anywhere. I got laughed at a couple times.
Got you here.
But my education did, and so I do appreciate that. And I know that the reduction in paraeducators, that bothered me too, because one, they're our lowest paid employees in the building, and a good para can save a school district $100,000 because they can keep a student in the building. So that bothers me, but at the same time, this is hard. This is to cut $1,200,000 out of a budget. Almost $300,000 is a lot, and programs are going to get hit. And I'm glad it's not a big cut, and I appreciate that the academic programs weren't cut significantly.
I can weigh in on just 2 quick points. One, we do have scholarships for students who are in need for sports. When I get to Angie's point about the food insecure, people who are a little bit above, but there are organizations in town that will help sponsor some of that, and we use them in the past. The para position, I'll comment quickly on. We currently have 7 para openings, so this would absorb 3 of those. And really, part of that is we have a hard time hiring. We have 97 paras in the district, and we have a hard time hiring paras. So some of those positions may remain open anyway, and we thought that it was not a good idea to have open positions that we couldn't fill on July 1, when those could be absorbed in part of the cut. And 2, we have a hard time finding para subs. So even on days when we have all of our positions for paras filled, we only get about a 50% fill rate on our paras, and that's not a New Milford issue. That is a nationwide problem. When you have 4% unemployment, hiring paras is a difficult thing. And so Mrs. Olson and Ms. Baldelli and Mr. Corpo and I talk frequently on changing some of our structures, because we can't rely on, to your point, so heavily on very important people when we can't have them, and so we need to rethink how we kind of operate, and so this is part of that process.
Thank you.
Angie?
So how many parking places do we have at the high school?
Off the top of my head, well, you could, if you divide the dollar amount by the, right, by the, let me do that quickly for you. What is it here? 33,000 divided by 225, about 147, 146.
And those are 100% filled.
Right now, they're 100% filled, yes. Yeah, and there's a waiting list.
There's a waiting list.
Yeah.
We won't have to, we raise it to $225.
There's nothing scarier than a high school parking lot.
JT?
Thanks. So I think it's really important to us, to look back to January, right? Where we were here in January, first time through, 259, Josh put in front of us, 234 is what we moved on. And I remember saying then too, let's put it out to the voters, let's see what happens, and we're not the last people to touch this budget, and it's pretty clear, right? It went from us, went to town council, went to Board of Finance, went to the voters. First referendum, fails. Goes back out, comes back to town council does what they do with it, and goes back out to voters, second referendum, doesn't pass. I think we really need to be cognizant of the fact that we went to 3 votes on this referendum, and the will of the voters told us, through all of those different votes, and all of those different advisory questions, there was one answer that kept coming back about our budget, right? And that was the will of the voters. No, we won't support that amount. We won't support that amount. And the third budget vote said, we will support that amount, which is a $200,000 increase from our current operating budget. So I think it's really, really, really important that we remember that, and that the will of the voters is ultimately the strength of our democracy, and it's also the strength of listening to our town, right? I think the other thing that we tried to do as a board was really value the input from the community in this process. And I don't think we've ever really done that in a good way, and I think this season was really indicative of that. I think we really did reach out to the community. I was really happy to see how much involvement there was from the community, from the broader community, to help us identify avenues for reduction. And I think using that information, it really did help craft this pathway for reductions. I look at the end of the day, as a public school, you've heard me say this before, free appropriate public education. That is our charge, is just that. Free appropriate public education. From a legal basis and just from a pragmatic perspective. Our job is to educate children. There's three things I think that are important when I look at kind of that fate, as they call it, right? There's the need to have, there's the nice to have, there'd be the really need to have. Right now, again, the will of the voters, I go back to that. We need to look at what we need to have and to protect what we need to have. There are some really nice to haves that we still have, I think. The need to haves, I think we really have to be cognizant that we can't have all those things. And again, why? The will of the voters says no. I said right from the get-go, put it out to the voters. I spoke at the Board of Finance meeting and said, put it out to the voters, let them vote. It was close, but they voted no, right? One of the things I do appreciate about this list of reductions is that it's pretty clear to me, the format, the look, how we can actually look down through here and see step by step by step how you got to that place and how the administrator said, we can deal with this, this is how we want to do this. I can support that. And I think it's also really important, even when we're talking about pay to participate, when we're talking about, well, one of the pieces I want to say about pay to participate, we're not pitting sports offerings amongst each other. And that's one thing that could be completely divisive in this community. To say, you know what, we're going to take this team and we're going to cut that, or we're going to cut this. Because when you get to that place, again, it's an equity piece. And these are all nice to have things. It's nice to have all these teams. It's nice to have all these offerings. But at the end of the day, when you start to kind of pick, we're going to take this off the table, we're going to take this off the table, and this off the table, I really have a hard time pitting those people, those players, those parents against each other. So at the end of the day, I think this is a bit more democratic in the sense that we still have all the same sports offerings that we started with. If you want to get people to come out and tell us what to do, you cut two teams, you're going to have a room full of people to tell you what teams not to cut, right? But if we're saying we'll still offer the same things, but these are the nice to have things, I'm sorry. That's where we are. We need to protect the need to have things. So when I think about things like pay to play, I look at parking. That's a nice to have. That's kind of a neat to have actually for kids. AP tests. That's a nice thing that we do. And I can appreciate, we want to try to get more kids to the test. I can support that. When we look at this, I do feel it does target the high school more. But when we look at our costs, that's our largest cost center. And I kind of feel that's where we need to look for a lot of these things. A lot of the nice to have things are at the high school. Again, it's our flagship school in the district. It's where all of our kids pass through, and we want to get them to that. We want to get them across that stage this weekend. That's where all the nice stuff is and the neat stuff is. But we need to protect the need to have things. So at that, I think I'm good. Thank you, Dave.
Can I just make a,
Tammy.
sorry. JT, you're always a hard act to follow. Really quickly, I have some clarifications that I just want to go through, but I do want to thank everybody who was involved in making these adjustments, from our administrative team, the Board of Education members, and to our community, who did come out in a lot of different venues to speak to us, to tell us what was important to them. I do believe that these adjustments do reflect that, and I'm very grateful that we were listening and in making these decisions. There's just a couple of things I want to clarify on here that I have highlighted. Number one is reducing the summer school salaries based on enrollment. I just want to make that very clear. We are not talking about ESY. We are talking about Bridge, and this has nothing to do with us closing off slots. It has to do with not enough people signing up to fill the slots, and that adjustment being made for this year due to that reason.
Correct. When we built the budget for the summer bridge program, we did so in December. We created the same amount of slots as we did last year. Between December and June, there was a lot of weather, and our summer is now about 7.5 days. And so families that may have been interested in attending that bridge program are not interested. And so our enrollment is much less
We're not
than we
able, yeah.
anticipated. And those cuts, again, are not, not, very little on this list, if nothing at all, really limits opportunity directly to children.
Okay, great. Number two, the 1.0 kindergarten teacher at Hill and Plain, are we still way below our enrollment? And my question is, what happens if we tend to get, which I think is usually the trend at HPS, during July and August, we get up to the point where we need that teacher? That is an adjustment that will obviously be factored back in.
So our projections for next year, when we built the budget, were 141 kindergarten students. Mr. Corpo and the elementary principals worked really hard to move enrollment for kindergarten up and did a lot of work to publicize and advertise. We are at 101 students currently. While we do think that will tick up between now and the start of school, we have 2 teachers budgeted in kindergarten right now. This would reduce one of those. So we still have 101 students. We have 1 teacher waiting for 20 students to arrive between now and August. And we can probably go a little beyond that before we
Look to add.
have to worry. Yeah.
Okay. And the Excel teacher is due to the fact that we just don't have enough
We
coming
added,
in, and with the
Yep.
retirement of phenomenal Excel teacher. We're basically just gonna go back to having 2 at Northville and 2 at Hill and Plain?
even if that Excel teacher hadn't retired, this is purely enrollment driven. That .5 Excel section was added because of enrollment. When that enrollment, and we have a pretty good handle on Excel enrollment because those are 4-year-olds that we've
Yes.
identified, birth to 3. So we know how many are going to be
And it's
there
dropping
next
off.
year, and it's dropping off.
Okay,
Yeah.
and my last question, I promise, is can you give a little bit more information about the school-based supplies and other small capital that's gonna be spread out among K through 12 school? It's the reductions and deferments?
Sure. So in your packet, you had a bit of a breakdown. And so we worked really hard, and I'll put a copy of this for the public, but we worked really hard with each of the buildings on their controllable accounts. Those controllable accounts total about $1.5 million among all of our schools in all kinds of supplies. That includes their small capital, things like cafeteria tables and rugs and Chromebooks, down to pens and pencils and art supplies. 150,000 is 10% of that 1.5 million. And that also includes athletics at the high school, which is a big number, or a lot of the athletics at the high school. And so what I gave you is a breakdown by school. If you take 10% of each of those schools' controllable accounts, the sheet that I gave you tells you how many different lines. So, at Hill and Plain, in 14 different lines through all kinds of small cuts, that totals $13,000. That is, like at Scatticoke, for example, and the high school took a big cut. Each of the departments at the high school had budgeted for carts of Chromebooks, if you remember. In that $75,000 cut at the high school, it is eliminating most of those Chromebook carts. We're not reducing the number of Chromebooks at the high school. We're not reducing the number of old Chromebooks that are going to be replaced. What we're reducing is the number of new Chromebooks that are going to be added to the high school. So when we look at this year's budget and what students have access to, and next year's, students will have access to the same number of machines, and they will actually be better conditioned machines because we're going to replace some of those that are 5 years old, but we're not adding as many new machines. And so that's where those cuts come. But in each of the schools, you can see the total by building, and then it's a myriad of lines. They went through basically that budget book that you had, and in some cases it was like $75 out of this line, $150 out of this line. Just trying to, kind of death by 1,000 cuts, and everybody doing a little more with less kind of a thing, deferring for a year some things, as opposed to making any drastic cut to any one place.
And it's really across the board, from truly supplies to electronics to everything, so.
And those were all done by building principals. We sat in a room together, and we worked through that as a group, and that's where that 150 comes from.
Thank you. I'm good.
Okay, Angie?
I have a comment and then I have an amendment. I just want to follow up on JT's comment. The high school, he said, was the most expensive, and while that is most likely the case, that is because our biggest classes are there. Our graduating class this year is 326, our kindergarten class this year is 232. So it would only make sense that more resources are going to where the most of our students are. And then I also would like to make a motion to amend the 2018-19 Board of Ed adopted budget by decreasing it $110,000 for the purpose of eliminating one administrator position.
Second?
And if I could speak to that.
Absolutely.
I feel that Sarah Noble is administration heavy. And I say that because, let me find my note. Where'd it go? Oh, there it is. They have 815 students and 3.4 administrators. That's average of 239 students per administrator. The high school has 1,370 students with 4 administrators, 342 and a half per administrator. Sarah Noble has 85 staff. The high school has 116. It's very disproportionate. I know there's a lot of socio-emotional needs, but I have to question whether the administrator is the proper person to deal with those things. We've brought in a lot of mental health staff, a lot of social workers and that type of thing. I think we could eliminate that position. We could save some of these other things that are going to cost families significantly. And I really don't think there would be a big feel here at Sarah Noble. I think we could get some other staff to take some of those tasks that were currently being done. The high school can do it. Their kids are older. Their problems are bigger. I don't see why we need to be so administration heavy at Sarah Noble. We've cut significant staff out of this building because of enrollment, and I think that administrators should follow suit.
Thank you. Wendy?
I agree, actually. I think that when I know this list is very difficult, but I think that these reductions need to be made across the board. And I don't see that has been addressed. In your budget, you have a decrease of 5 positions at Sarah Noble. And in 2013, when we were at our highest at 1,047 students, we had the same amount of administration that we have now at a projected 813 students. We are down 230 students in that time frame, and the administration staff has stayed the same. We've also had a grade shift. We've gone from, we now have 3, 4, 5. So there's been some changes, and while it's not ideal, I, quite frankly, will support this over running in and doing pay to participate after it's been a 15-year haul through this district to avoid it. And I don't understand why we haven't looked at that particular arena when the budget clearly shows the enrollment not there. And if you pull all the numbers from 2003 all the way up to this evening, the enrollment clearly shows that we can support that. And I don't know why it hasn't been changed.
Bill?
Well, maybe in 2013, there weren't enough administrators, okay? That could be part of the problem. I said back in January, I think we need more administrators, so I can't see supporting cutting administrators. What they do nowadays is far beyond what they used to do years ago. Just the idea that more kids were killed in schools this year than soldiers killed overseas. Those administrators are responsible for the safety and security of our schools. So they have a whole other ballgame that they're doing. It's not just meeting with the disciplining kids and stuff. It's the curriculum. We talk about evaluating teachers. There's a lot of stuff. I think, I always said, and I taught for 40 years, I always said, the problem with education is that we don't have enough administrators evaluating the teachers to make sure the right ones are in there. And so when you cut administrators, you're affecting, I think, the educational process. So I would never support eliminating an administrator just because enrollment came down, because I really think we never had enough.
Thank you. Wendy?
To clarify, we had 3 and we went to 3.40, so we actually bumped it up.
Good.
Not down. And I didn't insinuate that it was strictly that the role wasn't recognized. But we're touching the para bargaining unit, we're touching maintenance, teachers, every other bargaining unit.
Secretary.
Secretaries, and this is the one that hasn't been discussed. And when we hear comments about how the community has had concerns, and they've made this list, the community has also had concerns about administrators, and it's not on this list. So I ponder that, and I think that it is not, it's not perfect, but I'm looking in every line item, and I can't understand why we're going in right away and putting the fees towards our students, and we haven't even looked at that area. It's not even up for discussion until it was brought up here. And in the budget overview, those 5 positions, right in Mr. Smith's overview, it states that due to the enrollment decrease, the teachers are dropping there. So the workload would be dropping along with 235 students to boot. So that's where I came up with it. I respectfully disagree with you, Bill. I think we need to look at everything, and I don't think we looked there.
JT?
Laura, quick question. How many, I'm looking here back in the budget book, 555 students identified for special ed services or just?
That would be K-12.
Or K-12.
Either 18 to 21-year-olds or a preschool, so we're hovering around 604 right now.
All right. And I know this is on the spot. For Sarah Noble, what do we have for population expected here next year? I know that was in your presentation.
Actually, their numbers are hovering right around the same based on the recent referrals, so they're not decreasing in numbers.
So although the population of the school is going down, the number of students who are maybe identified or are identified
Right.
already is staying constant.
Right, and
All right.
that's a national trend too in terms of number of special ed, percentage of special ed students being identified.
So then my follow-up question to that would be, who's responsible in those meetings, let's say the IEP meetings or 504 meetings, who is responsible for running those meetings? I know we looked at having a special ed administrator, it's kind of split between the elementaries, but who's actually running those meetings?
Your assistant principals and your principal.
So, again, I'm going to go back to it, I'm sorry. Need to have, nice to have, need to have. That's a need to have. From a legal perspective, we need to have people in these meetings who are effectively running those meetings, for fear of opening up, a legal piece for us to deal with down the road. So, I look at what we pay those administrators is to effectively administrate in these schools. And those numbers right there, I didn't even know that, but that convinces me even more that if our special ed population is staying constant in a building like this, while the population overall is decreasing, I still see the need, and especially if those administrators are chairing those meetings, that kicks it right over the edge for me. So I would not support the motion. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you. Joe?
My opinion is we're not making the hard decisions here. We have 10 positions we're not filling. We're not issuing any pink slips. Is the administration a protected class when every other bargaining unit isn't? When I moved in here, we had 1,200 more students in this school district than we do today. And it's only 15 years ago. And the numbers continue to drop, as we've just heard. We're going at the moment, another 30 kindergartners less. If we're making hard decisions, they need to be across the board, and we're not doing that. What we need to have, nobody here is telling me why we're not going to charge pay to play for every other after-school activity. Just the athletes. $110,000 out of $63 million. That's poor choices on our part. Thank you.
Okay, any further discussion on the amendment? Yes.
Just have another comment. I think, I never felt we did our job when we sent the budget over the first time. I thought we copped out. I thought the $35,000 cut was a joke. I think I said that in the meeting. And JT's right, it went 3 times because we should have done our job the first time. And that includes making hard decisions. And I personally see the extra administrator at Sarah Noble as a 1, not an 8. The high school does it with 25% more students. And 3rd to 5th graders, I'm sure, have issues. I don't discount that at all, but I'm sure they're very different than the 13 to 18-year-old issues. We have to do something. So you guys are comfortable at slapping every parent at the high school with a $500 bill, because that's essentially what you're doing. Any student that plays sports, and I think, what we say, 70% of our students are athletes? Any student that wants to park, that's about 50% of our students. And any student who takes an AP test, which is about 75% of our students, at our encouragement. So you're willing to look every parent that has a high school student in the eye and say, write us a check for $500, because that's essentially what you're doing, because you're refusing to make hard decisions. That's my opinion.
That's a clarification if you want, or?
Yeah, well, first of all, with the AP, the first test is waived. The
I
first
understand
AP.
that,
Okay,
but we have significant students that take more than one.
I understand.
At our encouragement, I will add.
I
We've rallied
totally
for that.
concur. I'm not crazy about the idea myself, but the first one, we do provide for because we do feel that we should offer a college experience, and so that is still in the budget there. Did you want to?
Just a couple of clarifications. So, one, I wanted to just inform, so the pay-to-play piece and why it's not on, we can't charge fees if they're getting credit for it. So things like drama and the band and orchestra and the vocal programs at the high school are all tied to coursework. And so that's why we can't charge a pay-to-play fee kind of across all types of activities. And why sports among school districts becomes kind of that fee-for-service model. The high school budget for athletics is about $1 million, so the $100,000 is 1/10. And although, again, I'll go on record saying I'm not a proponent of it, we were backed into a corner that we're trying to dig out of. As far as the high school administration, I just want to clarify that we also have a special ed administrator dedicated to the high school full-time, and we have department chairs at the high school. While although they're not administrative in all of their work, they do take on some of the administrative tasks at the high school that the other schools don't have access to. So I just want you to have that piece of information.
Oh, that raises another question.
Wendy?
Well, thank you, that raises another question. So we've heard about finding, thinking outside the box, and I agree. So is it your opinion, perhaps, that if we were to reduce an administrator, we couldn't shift any of those burdens off to the other administrative staff over at Sarah Noble to make that work?
So the administrative, because I'm not sure.
In other words, we have a lower population at another school with a different type of support staff, I understand that, and that's a very key point. But if the administrators, and I'm sure that they are, and they are tied up with IEPs and PETs, and all of those are being fulfilled, we're not having a problem with that, okay? And are there other duties that, and administrators do a lot, so it's very difficult to, and I want to be clear that as you're not a proponent of pay-to-play, this is not, one bargaining unit situation, but I just don't understand why we haven't had this conversation. Are there other duties, if the administrators are tied to the PPTs and the IEPs, that can be shifted to other arenas in the staff? Can that position can be, pardon me?
You have to be an administrator to satisfy those duties,
All of the duties?
at least the IEP. And
Well, I'm aware of that, that's clear.
So are
But,
there other, so when I talk about high school department chairs, for
Right.
example. So I do think that we can have, it's a bigger conversation. So when we started this
exactly,
list,
exactly.
I would say a couple of things. There was a point in time, a couple of weeks ago, where we started doing some ins and outs. We're gonna trade these two positions, and we're gonna shift job responsibilities, and we're gonna create a new position that does this. We started to steer away from that, because that made this conversation far more complicated. I don't think that conversation is going to go away, but I think that those conversations in the minds of myself and I think the people on the other side of the table, is that we can do that through kind of cost-neutral moves around how we allocate the positions and dollars that we currently have. I think there are things that we could do structurally to change things around, but I think we divorced this work from that work because it gets very messy and complicated very quickly.
It's a fair answer, but the short
Yeah.
answer is, without being, and I'm not trying to be, smarty pants here, is that it can be done.
So for example, we don't, some districts use what they call teaching vice principals.
Correct.
You know, they're in the administrator contract, similar, or you could even move department chairs. Some districts have their department chairs in the administrative contract, and they take on some administrative work. We don't do that. That would grow our administrative bargaining unit by 10 people.
But if you're saving the position, or if you're.
Could be.
Could be.
But to come, I wasn't, you know, I didn't think it was appropriate to come in front of you tonight, kind of after the budget process, and say we wanted to add an administrator in here, because there are other kind of fingers to that.
Right, I
And
wouldn't
so-
support that. but-
Right. So, you know, we wanted to keep the situation separate and talk about pure cuts tonight, and talk about how we rearrange the chairs on the deck and become more efficient as more of a structural reorganization and not about a budget cut.
Like I said, on this particular motion, I do feel that some of the adjustments are top-heavy up at the high school, and I'm just not happy with them, so.
Okay, any other comments on the amendment? Tammy and then Bill?
I'll be really quick, because I don't want to pontificate, but I have to say, I think all of these decisions are very, very hard. I received this list, and I thought it was really depressing. It's $1.26 million that we are charged with here, and I take each and every single one of them very seriously, and I think they're heartbreaking. I do. Regarding administrators are concerned, I cannot equally weigh the emotional well-being of our students and the issues that we have in the schools that administrators need to deal with behaviors and anxiety and depression and bullying and everything else in the elementaries, to get it under control before it goes to the middle school and before it goes to the high school. I can't weigh that equally. And this is why I cannot vote to eliminate an administrator. I just can't do it. There are too many problems in our schools, and the administrators are the ones dealing with them. And that is my feelings on that.
Bill?
I'd like to move the question.
Okay. Those in favor of moving the question? Opposed? Abstain?
You needed 2/3 to call the question.
Mhm. So, we'll continue.
That's
Wait.
2/3.
One, those in favor? Oh.
Yeah.
609, that's 2/3.
I
Yeah,
just
I
wanted
didn't
to,
see-
I wanted to
I
be
didn't see
very
Eileen's
fair
hand.
and let you
Okay.
know that it takes 2/3 to call the question.
Okay,
It's called the amendment, right?
yeah,
Yes, the amendment.
okay. Can we read back the amendment, please?
Motion to amend the 2018-19 Board of Ed adopted budget by decreasing it by $110,000 for the purchase of eliminating one administrative position.
Okay. Those in favor?
Of reducing it.
Yeah. And opposed? Thank you. Okay. Wendy?
I have a motion.
Yep.
I'd like to make a motion to amend the budget, and what I'm looking for is, bear with me, a little bit of dollar amount clarification, because I'm not quite certain, but I'm looking at object 53200, BDZ 20643, under professional services in the amount of $65,000. And
What page in the budget book?
it's under Department of Instruction.
There we go.
And I'm looking at, I think it is 65,000. I'm looking at the position that we did a budget transfer for, Mr. Smith, that I think,
So that,
and I'm not sure it's 65,
right, so the transfer that we made earlier this year,
was for 65.
right, but that number was reduced in next year's budget by, I believe, about 30,000. I'm gonna have to go, I apologize, what page are you on?
No problem.
What's the BDC?
Which page?
It's in Department of Instruction.
Right, did you have a page number? I can get that.
So I'm wondering how much that position is.
So there is no position.
But that component, that professional service,
I don't know that that contract has been designed or structured. I believe you're talking about the contracted service for the social emotional support at the K2 level.
yes.
Yes, I don't believe that we've established, I think we budgeted approximately 25,000 for that next year.
35?
35, but that contract has not been written yet because we have no budget
So, is it, so, but it is in the budget?
at 35,000.
I just want to be clear, because it would have to be if we're going to pay it. So, 35,000.
Is there a motion?
I made the motion,
To reduce by 35,000.
correct, in that line item for that
Second.
position. If I could just speak to the motion.
Absolutely.
We had been given a bit of history of this, and it actually was from August in 2017 in which this was brought to the board, were operations with a job description and conversation regarding the transfer. And I think that, I think again, we have to make some tough decisions. And I think there was, the way that this was brought about was certainly, it said we asked for a job description, we got it, and I'm not quite sure that this is something that we can't, that we need to take a look at and eliminate. Because this is an addition, technically.
Maybe can I clarify the motion? It's by
Yes, please.
Decreasing the budget by $35,000 for the purpose of.
Out of professional services for 35,000.
So you'd like to leave it out of professional services?
The actual purpose is because of that component. I want to be very transparent
That's
on
what I
this.
said, do you want it
Sure.
by eliminating the K2?
On that position, yes, on that piece.
Can I have a clarification what that position is? I'm not.
Sure, so, last year, when we looked at our, surveys and we looked at our data, what we decided, and conclusions we came to was that we aren't doing enough social emotional support at the K2 level. That we have a large amount of, dysregulated students at the K2 level and interpersonal skills that aren't developed as early as they may have once been. And that is an issue not just for students, but for staff, for administrators. We see a spike in behavior. And so we decided we needed to address that, not at a disciplinary level, but at a systemic level. And so we're looking at new programs and teaching styles at the K2 level. We do not have anybody at the K2 level that can deliver this training, that can provide that support. The Department of Instruction is really one person. We don't have a lot of internal staff that can manage that. And so that's where that 35,000 was used, to bring in an outside consultant to deliver those services and to work in the K2 schools primarily around that work. And that's what they've done this year.
Thank you.
I'd like to weigh in on this as well. I think that that would be a huge mistake. Anxieties in our children is increasing exponentially for a variety of reasons. But I think if we sit back and think, this year's seniors have grown up with 9/11. They have grown up with violence. We have smaller children asking mommy and daddy, will I be killed if I go to school? These are the conversations that we have today, compounded with bullying. That is still an issue. And we need, the earlier we address them, the better off we are throughout high school and their lives in general. And I think we owe it to this community to help alleviate some of these emotional anxieties that are, quite frankly, produced by ourselves and society. So we owe it to them. There's no way I can support that kind of a cut. Brian?
I guess to speak to that in the dollar and cents aspect is one kid who we can't manage could cost us probably at the minimum $50,000 in outplacement, and $150,000 is some of the more expensive residential schools. And the anxiety in kids, Dave just said it, so I'm not going to say it again, but it's increasing among the younger kids. I see it every day in special ed, and there are more younger kids in special ed now than I ever remember in my 20 years. So I can't support that either.
Wendy and then JT?
I can appreciate that. It's certainly not something that I gravitated to, but I think that it was in addition. I think we have had support staff added. This board has added it over the years. I totally recognize that all of the issues that you've referenced to, David, in this motion does not indicate in any way, shape, or form that I am not sympathetic to that. I want to be very clear on that. But we have to really make some hard decisions. And I personally am not comfortable taking a list and just saying, it's fine, out of 1.2 million. I'm not. I don't think we've done our job. I don't think that that's the right thing to do. I think that this goes back to, as JT so appropriately said, in January, when this board discussed this budget and sent it on with a modest reduction. I don't think we did our job then. So this is, and now we're sitting here with 1.2 million. I just would urge this board to perhaps look at this list and try and make some other suggestions that we can all find some common ground on, because I don't think that this list should be taken, verbatim in its entirety. I think that negates the board's responsibility.
Thank you. JT?
You've heard me say it once. I will continue to say it. Our job is to be sure the schools are run well. It's not for us to run schools. We pay people to do that. I was in the committee on learning presentation where we heard about the social emotional learning. I am so relieved and happy to know that in our community, we're trying to bring some of those tenets of social emotional learning into our buildings, and we're trying to provide our youngest students with some of the language by which we can build capacity and bring that through our system. So I can't support this because I know exactly what that money goes to. And we have to be really careful as a board to look at positions and not people. I get really nervous that we're looking at a person with this and we're not looking at a position. I'm not trying to poke the bear, I'm just saying we need to build that capacity and we need to continue to build that capacity. And if this is the start to get kindergartners to talk about their emotions, by which we can have them check what their emotions are and understand where they are, then the good things of learning happen, right? If we have kids coming in to a classroom that aren't in touch with that or can't connect with that, we can't do any of the good work of teaching and learning. So I can't support this for just that reason, because I feel really good that we got to that point and we're actually doing this type of work. We saw that in the Committee on Learning presentation. Unfortunately, we didn't all get to see that, but those members did see that. And I think they could also speak to some of what we saw for the capacity we built in the district in this regard, SEL they call it, social emotional learning. Thanks.
Angie?
I just want to say that this was not a target after any person at all in any way, shape, or form. My question to you and my question to Josh today, are administrators the best people to deal with the socio-emotional needs? That's my question. I don't think they are. I don't doubt that we have social-emotional needs. I've seen it in town. I've seen it, in schools that I've been in. I don't doubt that whatsoever. But I'm saying, are administrators the people we need to deal with those? We need social workers. We need psychologists. We need other things. Holding on to an administrator just to have an administrator, that it's not the person. It's the qualification. Is my question.
Thank you. Yes?
Just briefly, that is not a targeted amendment. I want to be very clear on that, Mr. Shem. It was not a person.
Thank you.
Well, there's no contract right now, so no one has a contract, so it's not.
Oh,
You're right.
okay.
Understood.
And you do not need to be at a Committee on Learning meeting not to know what's going on.
Okay.
That also is a bit
Okay.
inappropriate.
We're gonna-
Didn't imply that. Didn't mean to, and I apologize if it's the case.
Okay. Okay, can we read back the proposed amendment, please?
Motion to amend the 2018-19 Board Vote adopted budget by decreasing it by $35,000 for the purpose of eliminating the PhD social and emotional professional services.
Is that,
Yeah, sure.
those in favor? And opposed? Thank you. Angie?
Good. I would like to make a motion to amend the 2018-19 Board of Ed adopted budget by decreasing it $110,000 for the purpose of reducing 2 academic coaching positions.
Second.
Can I speak to that?
Absolutely.
We currently have two positions that have, the folks have left those positions, they're empty as of right now. I just think, again, we're strapping the high school with a lot of expense. We need to spread that out. Brian had expressed concerns about coaches as well. We're not cutting anybody, these positions are currently empty. I would like to see us do something to kind of offset some of those expenses at the high school, and I think this is a way we can do it. It's not socio-emotional, it's, you know, they're a resource.
Joe?
The coaching positions came before us when I last sat on the Board of Ed. I can't remember the years now. It's been a while. And I had a hard time wrapping the concept around in my own head as to what benefit we were achieving there, and I never understood it. Now, I'm a simple country lawyer, so that's part of the problem. But I don't know that our teachers have seen the benefit of it or it worked for them. But it was under Dr. Pattyfoot. I remember us putting those positions in. Well, they were put in. I don't know that I voted for them back then. And so if we leave them empty, that will be okay. You know, need to have. Do we need to have them? I don't know. I'm done. I could keep going all night long, but I will pass.
Can you speak to?
Sure.
But may I? Well, with academic coaches, it's a model that was introduced, as you know, years ago. And it has a variety of functions. I'm just going to speak to one aspect, and I know I was guilty of it in my teaching years and many times. I had a tremendous interest in one or two particular places, and my pacing was off tremendously by a couple of weeks. And when you have weather like this, that's a pretty serious situation. But furthermore, it's another set of eyes in implementing the new types of cognitive learning that's being introduced at all levels. And that's where it really comes in handy, is because a teacher has many, well, day-to-day duties, lesson plans, blah, blah, blah. And the coaches can offer a new perspective in getting certain students to realize their potentials, which, quite frankly, you may have overlooked, you may not have overlooked, or simply didn't know a strategy that would work. That's, and then I'll pass it off to you.
So when I started here in 2011, as a district, again, it's one data point, but we were in the 18 to 20th rank in our DERG of 20 to 22 districts. Since then, we put in a new math program. They have Common Core standards that have transformed K-8 expectations. You have science standards at the high school that are new. You have a new literacy program that's in. We have really good teachers in this district, but it's really hard to teach instruction day to day and look out 3 and 4 weeks ahead and develop professional learning for yourself. We have a curriculum department of one that's in charge of K-12 curriculum for every subject. There are no other curriculum specialists targeted in this district, with maybe the arguable exception of department chairs at the high school that get release time. Those instructional coaches are the front lines of change in this district. And I think that the movement we've been able to make and the growth made by our teachers and our students especially can be tied to the work of the teachers, of the administrators, and the supports that are in place. And those coaches are a big part. And I'll ask Mr. Corpo maybe to weigh in a little bit on the work and the transition between the Office of Instruction and the coaches' roles in the schools.
We're starting to see tremendous movement, especially across the board in literacy, in pockets where there was homegrown curriculum, which was very difficult to write when Common Core first came out. And so with the adoption of Columbia, not only are teachers getting some deeper perspective about what those content standards should look like in practice, but they're also learning technically 3 new content areas at once if they are an elementary teacher teaching multiple subjects. And science is right around the corner to get layered on. We took a state test this year that was valued right now only based on participation rates, but beginning next year, our scores are going to count. I'm seeing large gains in pockets of departments and pockets of grade level teams this year that make me very excited. We did lose a few coaches earlier on, and I had to use contracted services. As I expressed in the Committee on Learning meeting, I had to lead a lot of that work myself through the work of the consultant, which was valuable work nonetheless, and it's exciting to see that it has paid off. But it had limited impact. I shouldn't say impact, it had tremendous impact, but it had limited availability to teachers. It's not like having somebody on site full-time who's there to model, to help you reflect on your practice, to help you look at student work, to have another eye on assessment data, on how students can improve. We talk about those kids in the middle. We're helping kids in intervention that are struggling. We're helping kids through enrichment that are making gains to make sure that they keep learning and growing. Those kids in the middle, sometimes, and I would say oftentimes, you ask the majority of teachers in this district, they would tell you that that second set of eyes can't always come from their administrator. They do their best, but what's missing is someone in the middle, a coordinator, the coach, someone who can help elevate their practice and help support them when they're stuck. And without that person there to go to, I wish I could be that person for all of them. I just don't think that's something that could happen. There's no other supports outside of myself and administration.
Angie?
So how many coaches do we have total?
We have 5,
I have to count them.
yes. Oh, 6.
That's what I thought. So we still have 4 that we're retaining. Is there a schedule that coaches go to every classroom every year and spend a set amount of time?
So we're making a move towards coaching cycles. I think I shared earlier that when they first came on scene, it was about really establishing rapport and what they were there to do. And teachers have opened their doors exponentially this past year. And there's a plan through the revision work to get them in classrooms, to get an eye on collecting qualitative data and quantitative data to support teachers through the evaluation process in a non-evaluative way, and work to coach in that way. And so next year, that responsibility is going to pick up pace in terms of getting in classrooms, helping to support teachers on more of a cycle of feedback.
But what I'm hearing you say, or not hearing you say, is that you cannot guarantee me that every coach or every teacher gets visited by the math and language arts coach every year for a set amount of time.
The issue really was that the coaches were covering a lot of grade levels, and so that made it almost impossible for them to get on a cycle with teachers to see them even more than once or twice throughout the year.
But there are teachers and students who are not being touched by coaches now.
Very few.
So we still have 4 coaches. Again, we have to make hard choices. Is this a need or a want? I mean, it would be great to have 10 coaches, but we don't live in a community that's going to support 10 coaches, clearly. So we have to make choices.
Thank you. Anybody else? JT?
Just by way of background, I think I remember, Joe, you were probably on board there. When coaches were instituted, I think there was a stimulus amount of money that came from the federal government. And that's when 2 things happened in the district. One was full-day kindergarten was instituted, right, as part of a stimulus package that the feds had given the district. I think I'm pretty clear on, or I think I'm right about this. And the other was instructional coaches. That's about the same time, that era, so 2009, 2010, somewhere around there, like post-2008, I just know that, right?
I think you're right.
Right. So
But I
think-
know it got, we paid for those coaches.
Yeah,
One,
I
they
don't
were-
think
Right,
that was
but I'm just
covered.
saying, as part of that stimulus, I think that was part of the motivation maybe to put it in and at the time. But looking back at that now, something like full-day kindergarten got put in, that's part of our district, right? That's part of what we do. It's part of the job now we do. I look at the instructional coaches. That's part of the job we do now, right? To reach out, to connect with teachers, to support teachers. We have a lot of young teachers, let's say. That's an excellent opportunity. At the end of the day, you're in your classroom so often, just 4 walls, and no one else has that opportunity to connect with you. The coaches can be that place that helps build that instructional capacity and that instructional language across grade levels, across teams, however it is. Having that as a functional model, I think, is very helpful. What I kind of find interesting here is we continue to come back to $110,000, which I understand that.
Well, that's for two place pair holders for.
It's also, there's only one item on here that's $110,000. And I think if we're gonna trade like this, and we're gonna say, let's put this $110,000 up, let's weight this versus that, I think we'll be here for a long time. Because at the end of the day, we could go ahead and listen to constituents. I heard pretty loudly, be happy to support pay to play. On the other hand, I actually heard from someone today saying, those coaches are important. And I heard from someone in the teaching corps that advocated for the need for those coaches. So I look at that, I mean, again, small sample size, but I look at that and I know that there's a need for this, there's an instructional capacity we're providing, and at the end of the day, pay to play, while distasteful for many, we roll that back in next year's budget. We put it out there and it goes out to voters. Again, will of the voters. We have to make the right instructional needs and meet those needs in a way that's going to be productive to move our district forward. So I will not.
Angie?
The 110,000 was 55 times 2 staff members, which is what our placeholder number is. I actually wouldn't eliminate pay to play completely. I would just ask that it be reduced. So the 110,000 just happened to coincide with that both times because the administrator cost was also $110,000. So I'm not specifically targeting pay to play. And if you look at my voting history, you'll see that I've supported pay to play on numerous occasions. So I have no issue with the pay to play. I have an issue how it stands here, but I have no issue with pay to play in general.
Sure.
Just wanted to clarify that.
Thanks.
Joe?
I wish I was that creative with math. That's why people become lawyers, because they cannot do math well. So, and ask any attorney, you know. But if to like, just lighten the mood, because it's tense, or I've got, this is difficult. If each one of these reductions to point came in, it would be $255,000. So, you know, could be in other places. I don't have to say more about pay to play. I don't think anybody doesn't appreciate my position on that.
Okay, can we read back the motion again, please?
Motion to amend the 2018-19 Board of Ed adopted budget by decreasing it by $110,000 for the purpose of reducing 2 academic coaching positions.
Is that, those in favor? And opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Any other comments? Proposals?
I'll go back to the first motion.
Well, yes, it's up for discussion.
All right, well, that's where I was waiting to get back to the big motion. And again, this is my first budget cycle, and it was like a baptism by fire for sure. I mean, holy mackerel, what did I get myself into? But it's been fascinating. There's been numbers that have been flying past me like crazy, and I'm trying to grab hold of them. But when I saw this last night, I was so impressed with this, and Mr. Smith, Mr. Larson, the whole staff who worked on this. It doesn't touch kids. You know, it's very minimal impact on kids.
Okay.
Educationally. So, yeah, there's this, I don't like pay for play. You know, I like the kids to have all the sports teams they want, and because it develops them. But educationally, I think this is an excellent way to hit a extremely high number and get it without the least impact on education. And we're taking care of the kids, which is what our goal is. So, I'm impressed.
Any other further comments?
Dave?
Yes, Angie.
I just, again, want to say, I think we're giving the high school parents a bad deal. I think you're going to see ramifications from this through the high school. And, you know, it's unfortunate that we are strapping parents at the high school. Literally, 1,300 parents we're giving a $500 bill to. And I think that's ridiculous. I think it's a shame we couldn't spread that out a little more, and that you know, I'm just very frustrated you weren't willing to work more on it.
Wendy, and then Joe.
I agree. I was frustrated perhaps during the budget process. I don't think that in January, there was a little bit more discussion could have been had, but we sent it forward with a modest reduction, and the voters have spoken. I understand that completely. However, I disagree with you that it doesn't affect students. It certainly does. That is my opinion. And I also am disappointed that we didn't look at all of the bargaining units. And I don't think that we did, and I think we have an obligation. I furthermore am a little disappointed that a list can come through that a week ago was handed out at operations and was a quarter of the way full with no dollar amounts, and there's only amendments coming from a few people. I don't think we're doing a due diligence to this number at all.
Joe?
If you take the pay-to-play, the AP exams, and the parking, this is Laura's man, $153,000. We suggested amendments that totaled $255,000. That would allow you an additional $102,000 to work with in other areas. It's unfortunate where we are right now. I'm disappointed. And I think accepting it as is means we didn't make the hard choices. Thank you.
Well, $1.2 million is quite a thing, and I'm very pleased that the members of the community have taken time coming to a forum, letting the superintendent know and other people know their feelings, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, including our non-scientific meetings in the grocery store with constituents. But that's something there, and also with the board members having several weeks to forward their thoughts. I know some of my thoughts were captured here, and others were not. This is a very painful experience for me, personally, because I don't want to cut any of these things on this list, period. But this is where we are. And I'm sure we'll make the best of it. And hopefully next year, we can have a budget to reinstate everything, and hopefully the community will support us. Are there any other questions, comments?
You guys all know that I'm forever the optimist here. Bad news is we're faced with a almost $1.3 million cut here. I think of this process, now that we are here at the end of June, we saw that coming, but here we are at the end of June. We look back at last year's budget season, and we had a referendum vote with 9% turnout. I look at the turnout we had in these three referenda in the order of about 20% each time.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that the public has become more involved in this process, I think, is encouraging. And I think it's really, again, the optimist in me plays out that involvement, that I can only hope that come January, come those times we look at the budget then, that we'll have additional public to come out and speak in support or in opposition and to help us craft these budgets. That, I think, will be one of the legacies of this budget season, will be that higher involvement from the public and from the community. And if these kind of reductions will be a thing to help motivate people in the future, then I have to hope that that could be a positive outcome from this process. So that being said, I'll do it.
Thank you. I'm going to reread the motion. I'll read it. No, there's too many numbers in it. I'll go. Okay, the motion on the table is to amend the 2018-19 Board of Education adopted budget from $64,278,670 to $63,010,586 as proposed by the Superintendent of Schools on item 3A, proposed adjustments to the 2018-19 budget dated June 20th, 2018. Any further discussion? Those in favor? And opposed? Motion carries.
Find out next
I need a
time.
motion to adjourn. It is 8:25.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Those in favor?